All right, everyone. Link in the description, archived, of course. It's time to start off the day with the absurdity of some of the new opposition to Trump's deportation rules. It's gone from dumb to absurd. Originally, it was, it's not pragmatic, it's going to cost a lot, it's, generally draconian. Now it's devolved into a think of the children sort of thing. This article talks about, for instance, dozens of children who penned an individual, and we're talking about how afraid they were, how terrible things were. And the article's like, oh, I wonder what happened to them. I wonder if they're still okay, and things, basically along those lines. Pro tip, if you want to think of the children in regards to immigration law, you should be thinking of the fact that fully one third of all of the children brought across the border or come over unaccompanied have disappeared from the radar of ICE and are now unaccounted for. So some of these people, if they're lucky, they're just dead because at least their suffering has ended. Many of them are being human trafficked. Others are being worked to death in under the table situations where they're getting sub minimum wage and being abused physically on a regular basis. That's basically what's happened to most of these children. If you want to think of the children, therefore, you should support a beefier border policy that keeps people from coming into the country and then being victimized. We've seen this in other instances as well. Women will come into the country again, and they'll end up trafficked, or they'll end up having to sell their bodies, or they'll end up, making $4 an hour with a bag of banana chips as a bonus every week, in order to sew textiles or something like that. Unfortunately, slavery still exists in the United States. It's just not legal. But if you're part of an illegal network, let's say a cartel or a terrorist organization, you think you give a fuck about the law, your very existence is against the law, and the people coming over are illegal anyway, so they're breaking the law by default. It doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for some of these people. Some of them are escaping from outright tyranny, communist countries, Venezuela, stuff like that. I have sympathy for their plight, and I think the United States needs to do more to try to overthrow leftoid regimes in favor of ones that are actually capable of being stabilized, at least at some degree. We're probably the only nation other than China that has the ability to help revamp a foreign country to mutual benefit. This, by the way, is now the stated State Department policy under Trump and Marco Rubio. He put out a presser on the 4th of July, actually, stating this. The United States is going to prioritize aid that it does give, which has been paused in many cases, to countries that have shown a willingness to actually work with the U.S. We need to get a return on investment, number one. And number two, we don't want it squandered. We don't want to simply give a foreign nation's government a bunch of money and it never actually gets to the people who actually need it. It just ends up buying, more gold bling bling and stuff like that, which has happened on numerous occasions, by the way. The whole think of the children argument, therefore, falls completely flat because these people are only thinking of certain children, children that are in the country and accounted for. Well, they're suffering relatively less. Okay, you're afraid that ICE agents are going to barge down your door. I can understand that that would be concerning. But are you being human trafficked? My hope is that in these cases, the answer is no. Are you being worked half to death with 14-hour days, 6 days a week in effectively an underground favela? Hopefully, again, the answer is no. And so their plight is maybe slightly better than some of their compatriots. So the children that I think of are the ones that are being, lynched and worked to death and prostituted and things like that. As far as his deportation rules in general, there has been an effort to try to identify specifically criminal elements within the migrant community. So we're talking again, cartel members, terrorists, things like that. Or people who are simply leeching off the system and misusing it and who are adding nothing to society. The idea that Mamacita and her three children, where Mamacita at least has a job and her kids are attending a public school, the idea that the Trump administration is uniquely trying to go after them, that's propaganda. The propaganda is, oh my God, Trump is going after hardworking, loving, you know, unfathomable numbers of families. He's going to kick them all out and he wants them to suffer because they have brown skin. That's sort of the vision of current US immigration policy being offered. And they were bitching like the other day about alligator Auschwitz. And I pointed out it was the Obama administration that created many of the detention centers along the southern border that got so overwhelmed that the conditions there were worse than the conditions in the Orleans Parish jail. That's going some, by the way. Um, Now you've got a brand new facility that looks, relatively humane by those same standards, and less of an overflow of people and thus less overcrowding and better conditions in general. And everyone on the left is bitching about it. I mean, we're either going to have a border or we're not going to have a border. If you don't care who comes into the country, so that half the population of China could be shipped in through harbors in California and slowly overrun the entire nation without any effort, then the current immigration policy, I'm sure it seems inhumane because you're a commie and you're also, culturally suicidal. But if you believe that we do need a border, it needs to be a stronger one. We can't half-ass it on this one. We've seen problems that arise when we do so. I believe we should have a very strong border defense. And then the hope is that fewer people will bother trying to come. Therefore, it'll be easier to weed out the specific criminals within that cohort and slowly filter them back out of the country, sort of like a reverse osmosis or some shit. This is what we need to be doing with regards to people who are illegally in the country, but otherwise, they're being innocuous. They're not really doing anything else wrong. That is not generally a priority for the Trump administration. Liberals, though, would have you believe that is the main priority. Well, they're just using limited amounts, very small amounts of criminal activity as an excuse to deport these people because they don't like their skin color. That's not what's happening. That's the delusion, the fantasy that has been built by people who effectively are arguing for open borders at the moment. Well, I don't support open borders. This is one of the things that I voted for Trump for. I would like to actually have a country as opposed to being simply part of a puzzle set of globalized countries in which people simply move from place to place without any rules whatsoever. And that's the way that things have generally worked up until fairly recently. Even Obama was stronger on the border, for example, than like Joe Biden. He was pressured by the left, admittedly, and he's more of a tough on crimer, actually, uh, arguably even more than Trump. Notice how he never got any flack from the liberals for the tough on crime bill that put a bunch of other people in low-end facilities. I'd much rather be in alligator Alcatraz than like the Orleans Parish Jail, for example. The conditions would probably be better. Honestly, the conditions would be more humane. You can talk about kids in cages and stuff. Okay, that's Obama's problem more than anyone else. It's continued by Joe Biden, by the way. But under Donald Trump, at the very least at the border, generally speaking, there is law and order. The deportations are necessary, and they are specifically targeted at people who have engaged in significant secondary crimes. So rape and murder and things like that, selling drugs to school kids, which is fairly rare because most school kids don't have the money to buy drugs. This is a big thing back in the 1980s and 90s. Kindly stranger is going to offer you that heroin and get you hooked. Well, where are you going to get the money for more heroin? Where's the return on investment? It comes to mind. That's about all. Peace out.